Some albums would have never existed if it weren't for leaks. The leaks have ruined plans, forced artists to scrap work, and sometimes created entire albums that otherwise would never exist. For better or for worse, the leaks sometimes happen when artists work on new albums, but occasionally, songs only end up releasing because they were leaked. And that's what I want to take a look at in this video. First up is the quintessential example, Armenian-American nu metal band System of a Down's Steal This Up. Over 30 songs were recorded for the band's 2001 album Toxicity, while only 15 made the final cut. The rest of those tracks would resurface in a very different way. In 2002, a massive batch of demos from the Toxicity session suddenly leaked online under the name Toxicity 2. No one knows exactly how the leak happened, but it's often theorized that someone at the recording studio was responsible. The band wasn't exactly thrilled, especially since fans were now hearing unfinished material. At the suggestion of Serge Tankian, the band went back and reworked the tracks into higher quality versions, which eventually became Steal This Up. Even the title's a direct response to the leak, basically saying, "Fine, you stole it, here it is, bitch." It might also be a reference to Abby Hoffman's 1971 book, Steal This Book. To this day, many fans, including me, consider this one of System of a Down's best albums. And frankly, I'm so glad it leaked, because Roulette, Ego Brain, Mr. Jack, Highway Song, and Fatal Waves are all in my top 20 SOD songs. And yet, they only exist because fans already stole them. But few thought System of a Down were the victims of a down. Wait until you see what Death Grips did next. I may be stretching it a bit with this example, but I promise it's interesting. Death Grips took leaks to a whole new level with their second studio album, 2012's No Love Deep Web. And right away, they made sure nobody could ignore it, by leaking the album themselves with an uncensored cover featuring drummer and producer Zach Hill's erect penis, with the album title written across it. The leak happened after complications with their label, Epic Records, over the album's release date. Instead of waiting, Death Grips uploaded the album directly to SoundCloud and different torrent sites. It wasn't exactly subtle, it was a very deliberate fuck you to their label. The leak was the release strategy. What makes this even crazier is everything leading up to it. The album was originally teased for an alternate reality game, sending fans on a digital scavenger hunt that revealed the planned release date, October 23rd, 2012, and even unmastered and instrumental versions of the Money Store. Nearly 14 years later, though, it still hasn't been entirely solved. Death Grips also cancelled their entire tour to finish the album. After Epic refused to release it on time, Death Grips announced on Twitter that the album would be delayed until next year sometime. But then, one day later, they just leaked it themselves. No Love Deep Web wasn't just leaked, it was an insurgence against their label. You could say Epic Records were about to learn the meaning of beatdown. An artificial death in the West? Okay, I'll stop. Next up is The Carter 3 by Lil Wayne, and I'll be entirely honest, I don't know much about him, but this album is so important in leak history that I'll be doing the video a disservice if I skipped it. If I got anything wrong, feel free to correct me though in the comments. The Carter 3 is Wayne's sixth studio album, and was one of the most anticipated releases of 2008, largely because it was one of the biggest leak disasters in music history. In mid-2007, huge portions of the album leaked online, and at that point most artists would have been fucked. But Lil Wayne just kept going, and because so much of it had leaked, he was forced to re-record and replace large chunks of it, reshaping the album almost completely. And that's where his first EP, The Leak, comes from. It was a stopgap release made up of 5 leaked tracks during the Carter 3 sessions. In a case almost identical to System of a Down back in 2002, these songs were leaked online by an unknown source, and later compiled by Wayne so that fans could have higher quality versions. It was later reissued as a bonus disc on the deluxe edition of the Carter 3. I won't go into detail on every track, but there is one whose history I found pretty interesting, that being the song I'm Me. It was originally called 1000 Degrees, and was intended to be the opening track of the album, but it and the other 4 songs were removed and relegated to the EP after they leaked. Wayne's honestly a bigger man than me for that, because there's no way I would have discarded my opening track. He literally just said, and I quote, "I'll probably just collect all the songs that are floating around and make my own mixtape called The Leak since people want the music so bad." What's really wild is that despite all this, the leaks, the delays, the rewrites, The Carter 3 still dropped in June 2008, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, sold millions of units, and became one of the most critically acclaimed and influential rap albums of the era, even winning Best Rap Album of the Year. Wayne even explained in the Billboard interview the same month that the leaks were one of the main reasons he released mixtapes instead of albums between the Carter 2 and 3. So in this case, the leaks didn't really ruin the album, but completely reshaped it. And somehow, the Carter 3 still became a classic, just not the one that was originally intended. Are we really calling a 2008 album a classic already? Damn, I feel like an unk. Next up is probably the most infamous modern example of an album existing because of leaks. Jesus is King, Kanye West's 9th studio album, released in October 2019. The album's overt Christian theme is already a stark contrast to most of Kanye's earlier work, and extremely ironic compared to his newer work. The project began life in August 2018 under the name Yandhi. It missed its first release date in September 2018, then again in November 2018, and then it was delayed indefinitely, largely because unfinished versions of the albums were constantly leaking. After Tyler the Creator's Camp Flog Gnaw in November 2018, Cherry Bomb is underrated as fuck by the way, listen to it, Kanye publicly acknowledged that the album wasn't ready. On the rescheduled release date, he literally went on TMZ and admitted that it was unfinished, before announcing he was flying to Africa to keep recording it. And at that point, Yandhi was basically dead. In August 2019, the album was finally rebranded as Jesus is King, which somehow still missed another 2 release dates. It finally dropped in October that year, alongside a concert film, to mixed critical reception. The key part though is that Yandhi leaked constantly, and I mean constantly. Early versions, demos, alternate track lists, etc. Jesus is King isn't an album that survived leaks, it's one that exists because of them. According to trackers, there's over 1,000 leaks for this album alone, and that's without counting the countless other Kanye leaks. Speaking of which, there's so many unreleased or scrapped albums that I'm doing a Kanye lightning round. Swish. Early version of The Life of Pablo, renamed to Waves, then finally released as The Life of Pablo. Earlier versions apparently sounded completely different. TurboGrafx 16, a scrapped 2017 album, supposedly inspired by Kanye's favorite childhood console, the TurboGrafx 16, which might have made him the only person alive to have genuinely ever said that. Very little material has ever surfaced. Donda with Child, originally planned for July 2020, missed entirely as per usual, continued evolving through 2020 after Kanye lost the presidential election, eventually becoming Donda, a completely different album in sound and tone. Good Ass Job, originally intended as the final album in the college series after graduation, eventually evolved into My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Good Ass Job 2018, a separate unreleased collab album with Chance the Rapper. At this point, Kanye's unreleased catalog is bigger than most artists' entire discographies. To end this off, we move away from the chaos, label sabotage, panic, infinite delays, and move into something much quieter. In 2019, Radiohead released MiniDiscs Hacked, a compilation made up of over 16 hours of demos, rehearsals, alternate takes, and live recordings from the OK Computer sessions. Unlike most of the albums in this video, however, none of this was ever meant to be released. The recordings came from MiniDiscs, an outdated Sony disc format owned by Tom York. According to guitarist Ed O'Brien, these recordings were allegedly stolen from Radiohead's cloud archive during preparations for the 2017 OK Not OK reissue. What leaked though wasn't just rough demos, it was history. The recordings contained many alternate versions of songs that actually made the album, like Paranoid Android, which has an 11-minute version with an extended organ outro. It's so fucking good! Holy shit! It's enough to make a grown man cry. Then there's also Poison, an early version of exit music for a film with completely different lyrics. But it goes way further than just that. These recordings contain early versions of songs that won't officially release until years and even decades later. Motion picture soundtrack from Kid A, Life in a Glass House from Amnesiac, super underrated song by the way, Nude from In Rainbows, Last Flowers from In Rainbows Disc 2, True Love Waits, nearly 20 years before its release on a moon-shaped pool, and the previously unreleased fan favorite, Lift. Some of this material had already resurfaced on OK Not OK, namely Lift, but the mini-discs leak completely reframed it, acting like a living timeline of Radiohead's music evolution. After a collector known as Zimbra leaked the files online, Radiohead responded by officially releasing all 16 hours on Bandcamp for a limited 18 days, donating the proceeds to charity Extinction Rebellion, raising over £500,000. And at that point, the leak stopped being a scandal. It became canon. This wasn't an album that existed because of leaks. It was an entire museum of archives that we only heard because of them. A bit of a side tangent, but if you're in the mood for a 9-hour retrospective, I strongly recommend Radiohead a deep dive by YouTuber Carbonated Dipping Jam, which goes over their entire discography and all these early versions in excruciating detail. It's a really fucking good video. The leaks usually hurt artists, but sometimes they permanently rewrite music history, whether anyone wanted them to or not. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you next time.